My name's Ric Hertel. I'm the prosecutor in Ripley County. I am involved in this matter because on January 12th, the Dearborn Circuit Judge, Jim Humphrey, appointed me as special prosecutor. The local prosecutor's office did cite a conflict with the local officers involved, and that's how I was brought into this matter. And if you don't know, Ripley County is just one county just west of here. So that's my involvement through Judge Humphrey, appointed on the same day that the investigation started. So let's go back in time to January 12th, 2019. The Indiana State Police and Dearborn County Sheriff's Department responded to a scene of what they believed to be a domestic disturbance. They were dispatched by 911 through Dearborn County. The first two officers to arrive, I did leave out the address. I'm sure you all probably have the address though, but it's a Sunman address, but it is in Dearborn County. The residents of the home were Christopher and Cassie Schmidt. The two police officers who arrived running lights and siren were Jordan Craig of the Indiana State Police and Brian Weigel of the Dearborn County Sheriff's Office. What they understood initially was this a domestic disturbance between a male and a female inside the home. What the male may have been leaving to go to a barn or outside, and that there were weapons involved. Craig and Weigel arrive. Craig sees what's going on inside, the disagreement that is physical. Weigel sees the same thing. And Christopher Schmidt, the male involved, exits the home. He has a long gun. He lowers the gun at Trooper Craig, and at that time, Craig shoots and Weigel shoots. Christopher Schmidt falls to the ground. First aid is rendered. He was pronounced dead at Margaret Mary Hospital, which is a hospital in Batesville. An autopsy was done in Hamilton County, Ohio. It was received by the Indiana State Police and the Ripley County Coroner April 4th of this year. With the cause of death being outlined in there. Basically, it's internal bleeding and gunshot wounds, 4 wounds total, 3 determined to be the cause of death and 1 more superficial. What I did as special prosecutor, let me just back up. I apologize to the detective with me now, is Detective Chris Tucker of the Indiana State Police. He was the investigating officer involved, and he's out of a Sellersburg post, which is not Versailles. The Indiana State Police requirement is that someone from outside the Versailles post would handle this investigation. Detective Tucker handling this investigation kind of from start to finish. We've met a number of times, had a number of phone calls, and his report was provided to me that included interviews, that included tape-recorded statements, video-recorded statements, supplemental reports from the Indiana State Police officers who were there, supplemental reports from any of the Dearborn County Sheriff's deputies who were also there, and interviews that were done from them. It does appear that there was a bit of a delay because this happened in January, and now we're at May 1st. I will say that the Hamilton County Coroner's Office and the morgue is obviously very, very busy, and when we get the report on April 4th, that's the turnaround time that I had to produce these set of findings, because I don't think it would have been appropriate to have a set of findings until we had the actual autopsy and cause of death finished at that point in time. I will say that on the day of the incident, that the wife was interviewed, Cassie Schmidt. She was cooperative, and she provided information about the mental health status of her husband, Christopher Schmidt, that he was taking medication. And as you see from the findings in the report, he was under the influence of some different types of medication, as well as under the influence of alcohol. In fact, the autopsy talks about toxic concentrations of those substances. So I think that played a factor also in moving forward. But Ms. Schmidt, again, was cooperative. She talked about earlier in the day, he told her that he was going to die that day. He had an epiphany. I mean, those were his words to her. And Earlier in the day, she had to hide a shotgun from him, and she also struggled with a knife with him over that knife, and that actually, when the police officers were there, the struggle with the knife was in the process at that point in time. The trooper and the deputy sheriff who were involved in the shooting were both interviewed. They were interviewed 48 hours after the incident. That is a common practice to be done. Detective Tucker conducted this interview. The determination that I made is that they followed their standard operating procedures in that deadly force was used because they feared for their life or a third person's life. That's the standard set forth by the Indiana State Police Protocol, as well as the protocol set forth by the Dearborn County Sheriff's Office. And that's why I made the findings that they acted pursuant to protocol. Both individuals fired their weapon. Craig fired twice, Weigel fired 4 times. The decedent, Christopher Schmidt, was struck 4 times between those 6 shots. There was a search warrant obtained before I was involved, and that was done by the Dearborn County Prosecutor's Office before the conflict was cited. That was basically a search of the property, photographing of the property, collection of evidence done by the crime scene technicians with the Indiana State Police, and they handled all the collection of that. The casings were found, and everything was photographed there by them. I will say that there were a number of law enforcement officers who were there at the scene who provided supplemental reports from Dearborn County, from Indiana State Police, from the excise police out of Indianapolis who responded to the scene as well. I did not include the full copy of the autopsy, but I pulled out what I felt was important, the cause of death being the 4 gunshot wounds, the 3 being more significant than the 4th, as well as I felt it important to include in there about his toxic concentrations of alcohol and the prescription drugs. I also cited in here that this report needed to be public pursuant to the Indiana Code. That's why you all have a copy of it. The judge has a copy of it. Anybody could go to the clerk's office after today and get a copy of it. I felt it also important to cite the Indiana Code that talks about self-defense and defense of others, because my, I guess, responsibility is to see whether or not criminal charges should be filed against anyone involved in the shooting death of Christopher Schmidt. And based on the code and based on the statements and based on Detective Tucker's investigation, it does not warrant any type of criminal charges. I'm not here to talk about any type of civil litigation that may or may not take place. That's something that is beyond my boundary or my purview, and if that happens, that will be something that will be taken up by other lawyers and not me. So I guess maybe in sum, I just want to cite the different conclusions that I have found cited in the last paragraph, that on January 12th, Indiana State Police Trooper Jordan Craig and Dearborn County Deputy Sheriff Brian Weigel acted according to department's standard operating procedures, using deadly force and carrying out their duties as sworn law enforcement officers. Trooper Craig and Deputy Weigel were confronted with a potential life-threatening situation of themselves and Cassie Schmidt, the decedent's wife. I find no criminal liability or wrongdoing with Trooper Craig or Deputy Weigel's actions. As a result of this investigation, I'm declining the filing of any type of criminal charges. And I have everything that has been done as far as the investigation by the Indiana State Police detective. There's no other information that I view that could come to me that would change things. Am I going to say that if something new would come to light, would I revisit this? I guess there's always a possibility, but I think his investigation is completed at this point in time, and I don't know what other further investigation would come about at this point to change my mind or alter things in any way. I'm available to answer any questions. I will say that in speaking to the Indiana State Police and the Dearborn County Sheriff, they are deferring to me to answer questions this morning. So if you have questions for me, I'll be happy to answer them. If I can't, then we'll move forward. Go ahead.
Would you say that this would be a suicide by cop situation? That would...
Well, I mean, I guess some of the evidence tends to point toward that with his statements earlier in the day to his wife that it was going to be his day to die, that he had an epiphany, and that he came toward police officers with a weapon and lowered it a weapon. I mean, it does give some evidence of that. I can't get in Christopher Schmidt's mind to say what he was specifically thinking, but you know, if we look at the facts and what happened, it appears that there's some evidence of that.
Were these officers, I think it's CSIS or something like that, certified? I think
well,
officers can go through training specifically for these kind of situations. Were they certified in that?
The CSI, which is a crime scene investigator, were individuals who came from the Indiana State Police, and their responsibility was to collect evidence and process the scene. Trooper Craig and Deputy Weigel are not CSIs. They are a road trooper, and he's part of an all crimes unit, and Deputy Weigel is a road deputy with the Sheriff's Department.
Has law enforcement been called on this couple before?
I'm sorry?
Has law enforcement been called on this couple before?
I don't know that law enforcement has. It's my understanding that they had not, but I don't have a record of police being at this home in the past.
Can you talk a little bit about why it was necessary for those officers to use deadly force in this situation to kind of protect themselves?
Right. Well, the two officers received radio traffic and a dispatch that there was a domestic disturbance, which I think puts most police officers on higher alert, because domestic disturbances are one of the more traditional, most emotional and dangerous situations for police officers. So they get their dispatched for that. They're aware that weapons are involved because that's part of their dispatch. And they start to approach the house and they see the struggle ongoing inside. Then the male exits with a weapon pointed at them, I think in fear for themselves, both of those two, and the female inside, who they later found out to be his wife, for her safety as well. So I think protection of themselves as well as this third person, the wife inside the home.
How old is Christopher Schmidt?
He's late 50s.
Are Trooper Craig and Deputy Weigel back at work? I know they were on leave, of course, for the investigation, or will they go back to work now?
It's my understanding that they're back to work and back to their normal course of duties, each of them working for a different department and doing slightly different police work.
Did they have to take certain time off because of this investigation?
I can't speak to the time off that well, they waited 48 hours to give a statement to the investigator. I don't know whether they worked in that 48 hours or I don't. I mean, that's something, I guess, kind of beyond my knowledge, whether or not the department.
They went back to work.
They're back to work, yes.
So they were on leave. Let's clarify that for me. So they weren't on leave? Or they were on leave?
When that's happened?
Yeah, after this happened.
Oh, after this happened? I don't know. I don't know when they were on leave. There was a 48-hour gap in time between when the shooting occurred and when that they were interviewed. I don't know if that's standard practice, that they are not working in those 48 hours.
I mean,
I
during
think
your
we're talking about
investigation.
after.
After the 40, for the last couple of months.
They're working. They've been working.
They've been
Correct. Yes. Sorry. Long way to get there.
No, it's okay. And I just want some clarification. So it says that Weigel fired his weapon, less than 10 times, excuse me. Okay, so he was shot 4 times.
The decedent was shot 4 times,
Okay, I
yes.
just want to make sure.
Speak a little bit about the weapon. You said that Christopher Schmidt was carrying. It's described as an airsoft or a BB gun. What did it look like? We see these kinds of things all the time where someone has a weapon that is indistinguishable from the real thing.
I know that it was it had a wood-colored stock, and the barrel was a blued-colored, but any more beyond that. And I know one officer described it as it appeared to be a lever action with a cocking mechanism on the bottom, but that was another officer that the detective interviewed coming to the scene to assist Craig and Weigel.
But nothing in that, about that weapon that would give anybody pause to think that it was not a real weapon.
I think that, only speaking from Trooper Craig and Deputy Weigel's standpoint, that they saw what appeared to be a long gun, a rifle type gun, and they saw it, and they did not have time to determine whether or not it was an air rifle, a semi-automatic weapon, or something else.
Could you go over the proper protocol in that situation? Smith, to be clear, Smith never actually fired the weapon, right?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay, so what is the proper protocol when, is it shoot to kill, is it shoot? I mean,
Well,
what's-
the standard from both departments are deadly force is permissible when an officer has reasonable belief to fear for his life or another person. So that's the standard. The use of deadly force by a police officer in both of their standard protocols were when they believe that someone's life is in danger, whether it be theirs or someone else's.
I think that covers it.
Okay. Thank you all for coming.